Hello, you are listening to Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. Welcome to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show, a weekly radio program that spotlights positive real estate development and neighborhood revitalization throughout the city of brotherly love. I'm your host, Derek Hengeville. Jumpstart Philly is a unique community development program that trains, mentors, networks, and provides funding to aspiring real estate developers in 7 different Philadelphia neighborhoods, including Germantown, where the program was founded. Jumpstart believes that you can do well by doing good and focuses on removing neighborhood blight, scattered site rehab, creating a healthy mix of affordable and market rate housing, and avoiding gentrification through slow, steady growth and keeping wealth local. Interviews are conducted during Jumpstart Germantown's weekly Jumpinar series on Monday nights at 7 p.m., held via Zoom webinar. For more information about these events, check out the events page at jumpstartgermantown.com. This week, I am speaking with an attorney, Richard Vanderslice, about the Conservatorship Act and how developers can utilize it. Rick's practice focuses on real estate, probate, and business litigation. He is the past chair of the Real Property section for the Philadelphia Bar and has served as a board member for 6 years. In that context, he participated in the working group that created the General Court Order for Act 135 cases in Philadelphia. To date, he has filed approximately 75 of these cases in Philadelphia and has consulted with attorneys in Allentown and Pittsburgh regarding the implementation of the Act. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and be sure to check out the podcast version of this program at jumpstartgermantown.com/media. So without further ado, Rick, how are you?
Great, thank you, Derek. And I wanted to thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I've read a lot about the Jumpstart program and what it provides to the members, and I think it's a really great service for the city. And I think it's really helping redevelop some parts of the city that could really use it.
Thanks, Rick. And we're happy to have you. Mentor or speakers like you are exactly what makes the program so valuable. These Monday night sessions are sort of a supplementary course to our training program, and covering special topics just like this, like the Conservatorship Act, is extremely beneficial. And I'm sure a lot of people here, would prefer to hear it from someone who knows about it themselves rather than try and, decipher some online description of it. So thanks for being here, and thanks for offering your time.
I'm happy to do it.
Cool. So let's just jump right into it, and maybe you can just tell me a little bit about how the Conservatorship Act came about and what factors led to it, and sort of just, as plainly as you can, tell us what it is. Okay.
It came about in 2008, but it really wasn't implemented until around 2011. Mm-hmm. Before the Conservatorship Act, if you had a problem property, you had to use other legal tools to try and do something about it. It usually ended up costing you a lot of money, and there was very little permanent result. For example, if someone's had a tree on a lot next to you and it was growing into the foundation of your property, you could sue them, get some money judgments, pay an attorney like me a lot of money, and probably wouldn't see as much results as you desire. This came about with Representatives Taylor and Walco authoring this act to try and combat a lot of the blight in their cities. Representative Walco, who's now a judge in Pittsburgh or Allegheny County, and Representative Taylor's from Philadelphia. So they saw the need for the revitalization of a lot of the neighborhoods and thought that this would be a good start. And basic overview is it allows a petitioner to file with the court to take possession of a property as kind of a trustee to make repairs and get it back into productive use. The first one was, like I said, filed in 2011. Since then, at last count, there were probably close to 200 filed in Philadelphia, and Allegheny County is probably at, I'd say 30, 40. And some of the other counties are starting to get a few, but yeah.
So has there been a steep or a constant increase of how many cases you've been taking on, or has there been like high or humps and valleys, or you know, has it gotten more prominent in the past couple of years, or would you say it's been consistent since its development?
It has definitely become used more frequently in the last 5 years,
Okay.
as the different parts of the city have started supporting the value that it takes to rehabilitate these properties. Unfortunately, if the property doesn't have enough equity in it to support the rehab, you have to have a really good reason to want to do it otherwise. But there has been a steady uptick, which about 5 years ago began to be quite a few. It's, there's been one or two nonprofits that have done a lot of them. And now a lot of developers are seeing the how powerful this tool can be when it comes to a problem property that is near your development or adjacent to it.
Cool. Well, that's great, because I'm sure the people in this call are going to be added onto that group that's just getting around to understanding the value of it. So tell me a little bit about your experience with it. Like, how are you involved? How do you interact with the legal substance of it?
Okay. Well, I'm an attorney, and basically it's a good idea to have an attorney file one of these because they can get kind of complicated.
Sure.
I'm not aware of anyone who's filed one on their own that's not an attorney, but I get involved when someone identifies a property and has been looking on the internet to try and figure out what this is. And so basically you look into what the title history of it is, whether or not there have been violations issued by the city, which is not necessarily dispositive, but it's a good sign that it's a problem property. And then you determine whether or not it is a blighting property, which is a legal definition, but it's something that when you see it. I mean, it's those boarded up properties that sometimes all nice, clean and sealed. Sometimes it's just wide open. Sometimes the back's falling off. But then you would come to an attorney like me, and we would prepare a petition for the court to ask that the court appoint a conservator, which is kind of like a trustee that will do the repairs to the property.
So how much of the legwork in kind of the investigation of the property is done by the developer versus yourself? Is someone building their case and then bringing it to you and you'll say, yeah, this is accurate or not accurate? Or are you guys working together to kind of figure out and really determine if it is a blighted property?
Most of the time it's collaborative. Typically someone who has not used the act before will have questions. What's it about? And we talk about it and then talk about the property that's causing them problems. That generally results in taking pictures, looking up the L&I history, making sure it qualifies under the act. I know we're going to get into some of this more specifics in a minute, but after that process, really the main investigation is trying to get people on the block to help support your petition, ideally by showing up in court, which is a lot harder than it sounds. It's quite often that there are a lot of people that want to see something done, but once you start doing it, they aren't as inclined to help or at least show up in court. It's for various reasons. I'm sure you can
or there's some cases where you might think they're on your side and then you get there and they're not, right?
That's actually pretty rare, but
okay.
Yeah, sometimes the other side will get to them. Put it that way.
Right.
Typically, it's been a problem for a while, and most people will want to help you remedy that.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the borrower is kind of bringing their case as to why it's affecting them and why it's their problem relating to their business or development, and you're kind of coming from the standpoint of let's identify, what the problems are of the property in general and like the status of it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There are specific problems that we have to point out to the court that make it qualify for the act. But generally, if it's a problem enough to where you're seeking, legal help to deal with it, it's usually gonna fit into the rubric for the court.
Gotcha. So next, can you tell me a little bit about like what being the conservator means? I mean, it's called the Conservatorship Act. You become a conservator. What implications does that have, and what sort of context does that have in like owning the property or managing it and developing it?
Well, if the court agrees with you about the condition of the property and finds that you qualify to be a conservator, which involves, having a plan to remedy the property, as well as having the finances to do it, what it means is you basically become the trustee of a property. You have all the rights of an owner except title, which is, that's one of the first questions I get most of the time is, do I get the deed of the property? Do I get title of the property? No, what you are is effectively a caretaker who is going to fix the property and then sell it for a 20% markup. Or, there are a couple other ways that these things go, but that's generally what a conservator is. I think this is a good point to give my usual admonishment. It's not an ideal acquisition strategy. You want it to be it should be a property that you have another reason why it would increase the value of your project. For example, you have a vacant next door to a property that you're developing. It's a no-brainer. It's bringing the value of your property down. It's probably going to start causing damage once you get your envelope. And so that makes a lot of sense. And you're going to have other financial benefits other than just whether or not it goes through the Conservator Act. If you're just driving around town, you see an abandoned property, you say, oh, I'd like to acquire that property. That's not really what this act is designed for. It's designed to take care of a problem that's relatively in the near neighborhood, technically within 2,000 feet of a property that you own. There are nonprofits that have the ability to go within 5 miles of their radius and help with properties in that way. And if you don't fit the distance criteria, then that's another option.
Gotcha. And just so I can get that number again, you said for not a nonprofit, for like a developer, what's the radius? You said 2,000?
For a for-profit entity or a neighbor, for example, it is 2,000 feet from the property that you own. So, for example, if your business is 2,000 feet from a property that meets the criteria, or if one of your developments is 2,000 feet from the problem property, that qualifies. I mean, it doesn't have to be where you live.
Right.
It's where you have a business or doing business, which developing real estate counts as a business. So
great, cool. So I want to touch on something you mentioned. You said that the only right that you don't get as a conservator is the title, right? So correct. Does that mean that you already said that you can sell it for a 20% markup? What about renting? Is that something that people do with a property that they've acquired through conservatorship?
That is a possibility under the act. The act provides for it, and frankly, I've never heard of it happening. Okay. I would suggest it as a strategy if the property did not have the equity to complete the project. So if it's a problem property next to one of your developments, but it's not going to have the equities to support the rehab, meaning what you have to put in to fix it, then rental is an option. The rental is under court supervision, so it's not as easy an option as just selling the property. But Yeah, it is an option. It's an option that I'd love to try, but haven't had the right project present itself.
Sure. And all these sorts of things, like whether you're going to sell it or whether you're going to rent it or, whatever is going to happen to it in the end, that's all developed through the process that the collaboration between you and the developer, right? You're
correct. We would sit down and from our initial discussion, identify the goals of what you want to do with the what you want the outcome to be, and how best to go about achieving that. There are several ways that the litigation can go, and we can try and talk about how to make that happen.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Well, let's move on to our next section here. I want to talk about how this, relates to the new and inexperienced developers that are in this call. Many of the people here maybe have never developed a property. They don't own any property, and this is just something they've heard about as a term in the real estate development industry. How can they utilize it, and you already said that this isn't a good acquisition strategy. So what strategies would you recommend developers to take take advantage of? I don't want to say take advantage of it, but apply this to their business strategy.
I understand what you mean. Yeah. So it's designed for either the one problem property left on the block, or one of the several problem properties left on the block that's still vacant and in bad shape, or if you're pioneering in a neighborhood, that the property on the block that you think will help lift, be the rising tide that lifts the rest of the ships. So for a new or relatively new developer, it would be, if you have a project and you think that there's a property on the block that A, fits the criteria, and B, will benefit your project by going through the process. The Act was amended in 2014 to give incentive to developers and nonprofits. Before, you would only, if you filed and went through everything and completed it, you would get paid out of the proceeds. And what we were finding was a lot of developers or anyone that's interested in the property would bring these actions, and then the owners would decide that, oh, I'm going to fix it, or before you get to court, it's sold, and the person that is trying to benefit the neighborhood kind of gets left holding the bag. So what the legislature decided was, hey, we want to incentivize this. We don't want this situation to happen. So it built in a remuneration structure so that once you file the petition, and assuming it fits the criteria, you automatically get your attorney's fees back, you get your costs back, you get 20% of whatever ends up happening with the property. So if someone, you file and someone decides just to sell it, you are entitled to 20% of that sale price for filing the action.
And in context, if you didn't pay anything for the property and you get all your legal fees back, that's a pretty good win, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is. It's just, it's not as easy as a process as one would like it to be. Sure. I think it was conceived as a much more straightforward process, and then people didn't take into account how real estate works in Philadelphia. And I'm sure we've all dealt with people who know how to work L&I and the right. Code enforcement court to the point where they get violations and nothing ever happens. Well, with the Act, you can actually affect change on one of those properties. So either the court's going to turn it over to you to do it because they've had enough chances, or the court's going to closely supervise them, and if they don't do it, they turn it over to you to remedy the property.
Gotcha. So again, going back to, the people in this call and how they can utilize it. I mean, I imagine most people's first endeavor in the real estate development game is going to be a single family home. Whether it's a gutted house that they're developing, or, I imagine a lot of people aren't doing new construction as their first project, but say they are, how practical is this for a single family home development? Is that something you see a lot? Is it usually larger or smaller projects than that, or?
I mean, the majority of them that have gone through are usually a single family residence. I mean, again, it's not an acquisition type of a situation. It's, I'm building and the property next to it is a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Or, there's a property down the block where we know illicit things are going on, and the neighbors want to take care of it, and you have the wherewithal to do it because, you're the developer on the block. Mm-hmm. Whether or not it's your first or third or fifth project, that will be taken into account. But, it's for first-time developers, a lot of times you can get frustrated by the properties around you and not being able to do anything with them. So we've found that, not only the developer has to do anything, but there are nonprofits out there that if it is a problem and you want something done about it, we can reach out to the nonprofit that will basically do everything. So, when you are choosing your first or second or third property that you're going to develop, and everything's great, but there's a vacant that's boarded up and there's some guy sleeping on the porch. Mm-hmm. Well, even if you can't do anything, there are several nonprofits in the city that will take on those projects. And believe me, they love nothing better than to have motivated participants in these. So that would be, for a first-time developer, that would probably be how it would come into use.
It sounds like regardless of what your intention is, like whether you are really invested in taking care of the property and doing the work yourself, or regardless of what the end use you want it to be, it sounds like they should still reach out and try and go through with this act, because it's like somebody's going to solve it, right? As long as it's addressed through this, typically.
Yeah, that's the idea. I think it was the idea originally behind the act. I mean, getting back to the history a little bit, it was brought online when there was a lot more involvement by what are now called RCOs. They used to be called neighborhood development corporations. Mm-hmm. And they had a lot more funding. And, the thought was these neighborhood corporations would go in and fix these properties. This was kind of geared towards them. And then when it actually came into use, it started to be used by developers. And one nonprofit in particular made it its mission, and a couple more have sprung up. But it was not originally intended as much of a private sector tool as it has become. And to its credit, the legislature realized that and amended the act to incentivize private developers to take advantage of it.
If you're just tuning in, this is an interview with Richard Vanderslice, an attorney, about the Conservatorship Act and how it can benefit developers. Thank you for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. I hope you're enjoying our discussion.
Great. Yeah, thanks for connecting the dots there. I mean, that makes sense, kind of how it's like, it was created as this perfect idea, and then it's like, oh, well, maybe there's this other need we can address by doing it. People looking to, not just the nonprofits that want to do it, but the people who live on the block who are like, we need to solve.
Exactly. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Philadelphia is one of the only cities that has a limitation, is the only city that has a limitation on the distance. So every other city, if it's across town, you can file on it. It's just Philadelphia limited.
Why is that? Is it just like an antiquated law that's been, held on to?
I think I think it came from the idea that it would be neighborhood corporations using it mostly. And it just really hasn't changed. I mean, it used to be 500 feet. So you had to own something within 500 feet, which is, I mean, 16 foot, it's basically a block. Now you're, 2 or 3 blocks. So, yeah, that was a tough.
Do you see it expanding at all, or do you see in the future, Philadelphia addressing that kind of disconnect from the way other cities are doing it? Or
there are amendments that have been pending for a while. I thought that there was going to be movement on it last spring, but life got in the way.
Yeah,
a microbe got in the way. So we're hoping that there will be some amendments soon that will increase the radius for private developers, but and some other changes that will make it more effective tool for private developers as well as nonprofits. But that's kind of the will of the legislature, and we gotta wait for Harrisburg to do its thing. So
yeah, you're making do with what you have right now. So we're not running short on time, but it's flying by. So I want to kind of get into the nitty gritty of things now, and we can talk about eligibility. So, I'm sure there's hundreds of stipulations that you could go through, but maybe in the most efficient way you explain it to me. What makes a property eligible? What are those like key factors that people are looking at that they're saying, oh, this would go through, this wouldn't go through, and you know what I mean?
Sure. I think it'd be easier to start with what makes it ineligible, because that knocks things out of the box right away.
Right.
If the it has to be a vacant property, and it has to have been vacant for the last 12 months. Okay. Vacancy does not include squatters. So if you have a good reason to believe that someone's squatting or using the property illegally, for example, it's a blighted property that someone's illegally hooked up electricity, that's not a legal use of the property. Another thing is if the property's in foreclosure, this remedy is not available. If it's been conveyed within the last six months, there are some certain, where states are involved that's not a problem, but that would knock it out as well. And finally, if it's been listed by a licensed real estate agent for a reasonable price, there have been some people who have caught wind of this that are land banking these properties and, listing them for $1 million for a shell in, brewery town, which you might be able to get 100,000, but you better be pretty close to Style Street or something. Mm-hmm. So that's what knocks it out from the beginning. Once you clear those hurdles, we have to prove to the court that there's some kind of illicit activity. Well, one of 3 of these factors, which we're trying to get increased in the new amendments, but basically whether it's a public nuisance, which is kind of a catch-all, if it's a problem property, we can get several qualifying factors under that. If it's been boarded up by LNI or is wide open to public entry, if you see kids playing in it and can get a picture of it, especially. If the property has been used for illicit purposes, so if it's used for a drug house, if people are using it for sex work, if there's graffiti, even, but there are a few others that trash and debris, which is obvious. If there's problems with the structure, the front's bowing, if it's missing doors and windows, usually the front of the property can look okay, but the rear of the property, in Philadelphia, they get pretty bad pretty quick. So, the bump outs falling down or the rear bay is hanging on by a thread, that kind of thing. So usually if you can get back in the alley or, behind the property, that's usually where you find the most problems with the property, even if it looks okay from the front.
Gotcha. So all of the things you've described right now sound like issues with structures, things that are built on the property.
Right.
How often is there a case made for some like an empty lot or maybe like an empty lot with a car in it or something? Is that common, or is it always a structure?
It's not common, but it's done. So if the lot's in bad shape, a car sitting on there for several years is a good example. A lot of times, if it's in a developing area, there's going to be short dumping. People just throwing their contractor waste. I had one case where the property we were filing at was a dwelling, and my client owned the lot next door, and the guy just took everything that was in the property out and threw it on my client's property. We had to go to the court and be like, hey,
yeah,
this isn't what it's supposed to be. This is how it's supposed to be. So yeah, it's there's a lot of ways to prove that these properties fit the criteria.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, that was a great recap. Thank you. So now, kind of, if you could make the case for people who are like, maybe somebody's thinking, oh, there's this property right down the block from my development, this is going to be perfect. What are some of the benefits of it and the pitfalls of going through with the conservative process that you would warn them of? Is there anything that you're saying? I guess we kind of went through a lot of this, but maybe if you just can think of any key points where it's like, this is what you want to, like, your goal should be this, or, look out for this.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the obvious benefit is it puts it into productive use, and hopefully will increase the comps in your area. One thing I don't want to leave the impression of is that you have to fully rehabilitate the property. What you can do is bring it to what I call a clean envelope. Basically, make sure the exterior of the property is in good shape, not blighting, clean the front, repair the rear, sometimes repair the roof, and make sure that all the joists and everything are structurally sound inside. Mm-hmm. And then you can sell it out to someone who's going to finish the development. Right. And you still get the 20% for doing that amount of work, which, is often more than it sounds, but it helps move the project along where you don't have to put as large of a capital outlay. Mm-hmm. The benefits, other than monetary and, helping your block where your project is, or your area where your project is, mm-hmm. is that, you're more welcomed by the neighborhood. So when you do your next project, they're at the RCO meeting, saying, hey, this is a great person. He fixed this property that's been a problem down the way. Or, you're trying to get something rezoned by city council, and you have a neighbor going, hey, she took care of this property on my block. I really want this person to get this zoning. The pitfalls are 1 out of every 20 is going to have someone that is just totally irrational and will fight it to the tooth and nail. And, I've had someone file an injunction against someone that is my client, who was appointed the conservator, and the Department of License and Inspection for 2 other properties, to try and keep us from, rehabilitating that one property and keep them from tearing down the other one. Right. So she was kind of making our case for us. But, the pitfall is it's a legal process, and you never know what you're going to get on the other side. It could be as simple as, oh, I didn't even know that property was in our family. Yeah, do whatever you want with it. Here, I'll sell it to you.
Right.
The very first one that I did, which was the 4th one filed in the city, it was an old VA post that had been taken over by the mob at one point and was sitting blighted. And by the time we tracked down which VA was responsible for it, they basically said, we don't want anything to do with it. Take it. And, that's every now and then.
Right.
Quite often, the people just want to get it off their hands. There's, when you run into a family home, that's a home that's been in the family for a while, people will usually try and fight you, but have the means to really take care of it, which is probably the saddest situation you can get involved in. And then there's the land bankers, which has nothing to do with the land bank law that is used. It's what we used to call people who acquired property just to take out mortgages and use it for other stuff. So they're, it's not as common now because you can't get the property as cheap as you used to be able to, but they still own them, and they're still a problem because they're waiting for, gold.
Right.
They're sitting on gold.
Right.
But when you run into any of those, it can be a problem. But
sure, yeah, and I appreciate your honesty in the fact that 1 out of 20 around something like that is going to be a problem property, and I think that's something important to take into consideration. But hopefully, and I would imagine that like you mentioned, the collaboration between the attorney, yourself, and the developer, a lot of that is trying to mitigate that risk, and hopefully that there's no big problems like that down the line, right?
Yeah, exactly, and I can usually get a good sense for it by either the L&I history or,
Sure.
There are a lot of things that shoot up red flags,
And that's why nobody has done it themselves, right? That's why it's a attorney required process.
I know some attorneys that have done it themselves, but other than that,
right. Okay, great. So next, I would just want to, we don't have too much time left, but maybe we can finish on this. Let's talk about the process. So say you've made the case for somebody in this call. They're saying, "Oh, this is perfect. This is exactly the strategy I think I need to take to raise my comps or help my block clean up or whatnot." Where should somebody start? What's their first step? And I'm sure the process becomes clear as they begin it, but maybe you can just give a brief outline of like start to finish what the conservatorship process looks like.
So it typically starts with a title report. You want to make sure you know who owns it. In Philadelphia, that's not always that clear. You also want to know what kind of liens are against it. One thing is municipal liens. So when you become conservator, everything that you spend on the property becomes a lien, and that lien supersedes all liens except for municipal liens. So, for example, if there's an old mortgage and they don't participate in the action, it gets wiped out. So everything except taxes and L&I gets wiped out. So that's another part of the evaluation that we would take on initially. Then real quick, we would finish our investigation. That usually includes pictures, developing a plan for the rehabilitation that we're going to present to the court, filing with the court to tell them, this is the property, this is what's wrong with it, and this is who owns it, and these are the lien holders. We have a hearing. The court decides whether or not the property meets the criteria and whether or not the person who owns it shows up, says, "Judge, I'm going to fix it. I've been meaning to fix it. Okay, you got 60 days to do X." Or the judge says, "No, you've had your chance. It's, we're appointing a conservator, and assuming the conservator has a good plan and the financials, the court will appoint the conservator." Then you get into the property, you look at, you figure out what can be done with it, come back to the court and say, this is our plan. The court usually approves it. Sometimes they want some tweaks. Then once the plan's approved, and frankly, while the plan is being approved, you're securing the property and you're taking out insurance. And after your plan's approved, basically you just finish that up. When you're done, you tell me and I file a petition with the court to sell it or dispose of it in other ways. One question I invariably get is whether or not you can buy it yourself out of the conservatorship. The answer is a qualified maybe. It really depends on the judge and how they're perceiving what's going on in this whole thing. I can tell you it's been done several times. I can't tell you it will work on every project. But you sell the property, or however the property is disposed of. You rent the property if you want to try that. Then the court basically awards you your fees and liens and my fees and your experts and your architects and all that good stuff.
So I'm sure it's a spattering all across the line, but what is the timeline you would estimate? Is it 1 month process, 3 months, 6 months?
Well, the pre-COVID timeline would be, we could get you appointed and get you ready to go probably within 3 or 4 months. And then the timeline depends on how long it takes to do whatever rehabilitation you want to do. If someone's doing a full rehab, it's going to take, a year. Mm-hmm. But, once you get done with your rehab, then we're, petitioning the court, and that takes a month, 45 days to wrap up. Well, then you got title companies involved, so that can add some time. But I mean, on a typical Philadelphia row house, in normal times, I would generally say 6 to 9 months. Okay. Now it's at least 12.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you there, because I don't think we've had a single speaker come onto one of these that's like, oh, we're just as fast as we were before. There's always that stipulation. But
L&I's gotten a little better. I mean, the Eclipse system, once you get used to it, it's not too bad.
We've had them come on and speak at these a couple times, and we had Will Fernandez from L&I come speak at our training program, and they definitely are consolidating all their efforts into making sure that it's getting back to the timeline as it was before.
That concludes my conversation with attorney Richard Vanderslice about the Conservatorship Act. I hope you learned a little bit more about positive real estate development. Next week, I'll be speaking with a Jumpstart Germantown mentor, Matt Wall, about property management and the decision to do it yourself or contract out. The interviews on this program are recorded during Jumpstart Germantown's weekly Jumpinar series, which takes place via Zoom webinar every Monday night at 7 p.m. If you'd like to participate in the live Q&A with our guest, be sure to head to jumpstartgermantown.com/events and register for next week's Jumpinar. And if you're interested in starting a Jumpstart program in your own community, visit gojumpstart.org to see our how-to guide and our open source training workbook. Thanks so much for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio WRGU 92.9 FM, and be sure to tune in next week.